How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, I want to finish up on exploring this narrative one more time about how TMZ is shaping the David Celeste narrative and even the Mark Sanchez narrative, even though the most recent report about Mark Sanchez seemed to be a bit more objective. But then I saw this pop up for P. Diddy. Chokes up on phone with baby love. Diddy's away for a little while. So what do we have here? We have P. Diddy as a victim right now, or is that about his daughter? I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, once they get convicted, are we still painting the picture that he is the victim of the justice system? He did this to himself. He's lucky that's all he got. So again, the narrative they paint, unfortunately, sets the impression moving forward. So I want to revisit this one more time, but this time I want to kind of answer some more questions that have been asked my way, and I also want to put some questions back your way. This way, we make sure that when we're drawing a narrative, drawing a perspective, it's truly something that we can take full ownership of. And again, the reason why this comes to light is, talking about the David case, the Celeste Rivas, when you're connecting yourself to the victim, you take a level of ownership in regards to how you are trying to get her message carried out. And when someone tries to switch that message or maybe make a subtle shift, you jump on it because you're connected to the message. So most of the stuff that I'm kind of bringing back this way is really based on something that just doesn't feel right, something that I just can't connect with. And the same thing happened with the Mark Sanchez story. I feel for Perry Toll, the victim. And once, there's proof there that showcases that, it looks like Sanchez was the aggressor, all of a sudden you got TMZ sending out just crazy articles, including, which blows my mind, the weapon that Toll used to protect himself. So it's not a weapon now, it's a tool, was a strict violation of work policy. And we did a video on that. Me and Russ, if you guys watched the live that we did that's posted, me and Russ Hamilton, we destroyed so many accounts of bias reporting in that video. I mean, we went from TMZ to also News Nation. You really got to check out that video. I think you'd find it interesting. But I want to go back and talk about this media narrative, and I want to kind of focus on these two, which would be the David case with Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and then the Mark Sanchez. So in the age of instant information, the first story we hear often becomes the truth we believe, even when subsequent facts tell a completely different tale. This analysis examines two recent high-profile cases where celebrity status, so media framing, and psychological manipulation converge to shape public perception in ways that had little to do with actual evidence. So the first question of reflection I want sent your way is, before we begin, I want you to ask yourself, when you first heard about either of these cases, what was your immediate assumption? And how was that assumption formed by the headline, the first paragraph, or the images accompany the story? Like for Mark Sanchez, he was stabbed. So everybody felt sympathetic towards him because he was stabbed, and very little context. And then for the Celeste Rivas, kind of goes back and forth a little bit because looks like they were coming for David at first until the lawyer got involved. But initially, how they framed that, and we'll get to that, was unique. So when news broke out early September that Celeste Rivas Hernandez decomposed and dismembered body had been discovered in the trunk of a Tesla registered to rising music artist David Burke, or David, the media coverage immediately spotlighted the shocking connection to the singer. The story's initial frame was clear: a teenage girl found dead in a celebrity car, an implication of possible foul play that placed Burke under intense public scrutiny. Now remember, guys, I didn't cover this right away. I probably didn't start covering until after it was discovered that it was a 14-year-old girl in the vehicle. Now, yes, I know she was 15 when the body was discovered, but most likely was dead when she was 14. TMZ early reporting drove this home with graphic detail. If you look at their article, the very first article, it says decomposing and chopped up body inside David's Tesla, and even labeled the situation the David case, effectively centering him in the narrative. Other outlets echoed the same lead. Celeste body found in the trunk of singer David's car. And this lead paragraph emphasis on David created immediate association between the artist and the tragedy, exemplifying media inverted pyramid approach. What do I mean by the media inverted pyramid approach? The most attention grabbing facts, or the most attention grabbing facts came first. Thanks to primacy bias, many people's first impression was to view David as a potential suspect, or at least intimately tied to the crime. Now, a question. Why do you think TMZ chose to describe the body as chopped up rather than using less graphic language? And what emotional response does this language create? And how does it affect our judgment of the vehicle's owner? You know what's unique here? No one really seems to know where the rumor got out there that it was a chopped up body or a hacked up body. I'm assuming someone on scene, and this is just an assumption, may have expected it to be an adult. And they probably made the assumption that because it was so small and because it was so badly decomposed, someone made the assumption that the body was hacked up. And TMZ ran with that because they knew right off the bat that's going to connect to some interest. And then you connect that to a rising star. That's interest. It just connects to so many different areas of interest. So that right there, you could tell is strictly tabloid heading, right? Let's get the clicks. Okay, you got some facts a bit wrong, but let's chase those clicks. And the funny thing I realized, and I said this in the last episode, it's not even so much about the clicks or the views. It's also about the chance to create the narrative. Because as I've been watching other news report on this incident, a lot of them are saying, well, TMZ was the first. So they're going to TMZ to keep that narrative going, to keep what they started in this direction that they have planned. And at first it was against David and everything was exploited against David. And then eventually it became about Rivas being a runaway and a troubled home. And then the narrative shifts so many times. And the timing of it, as I mentioned, was pretty unique. It was when Blair Burke, the lawyer, I feel, got involved. Then I started thinking, well, again, maybe there's a chance that some of these lawyers are really good lawyers because they're connected to the media and they could paint a public perception that actually will probably aid the individual who's the main target. I think that is truly what these lawyers tend to do when they know that at the end of the day, the evidence is against my client. And right now I could destroy the credibility of the people that are kind of put in context to the evidence, which happens, or I could try some level to minimize accountability. But when all that doesn't work, I could create some confusion, create some distraction, create a third-party narrative, something that we use unfalsifiable controversy. Unfalsifiable controversy. I could create another story to confuse the public, to put that hint of doubt, and then gradually just introduce a little more. Not all at once, because that'd be too much. Can't do all at once, but you could do it slowly. And guys, I see it working even on our fellow sleuths on the internet. The strength of the argument at the very beginning against David was there. And then next thing you know, it all switched over to blaming the victim or blaming the family. It's like they fell into being tricked just as much as the media is trying to push. And now the narrative gets completely confusing. But the good thing is when there's people that are trying to be that voice for the victim, they get very protective of that victim. And if there is someone that's just trying to shift that story just a bit, maybe like what we call blame shifting, then we step up and we hold true to the narrative. We're not so quickly pushed because we felt the connection to the story that's a lot deeper than what's being fed to us. It truly is justice. And some of us have stayed with what holds true. And again, that's because we read everything. We read the title, the paragraph. We all know that first paragraph in the title is all about propaganda. And then we read straight to the very end, all the way down to the last period, and we start to see conflicts. We start to see that the title was probably clickbait. And the words around the title, that paragraph, they're just words that have no meaning, no context, just no depth. And we're going to get to all that. But again, this is more for clickbait. That's why they push titles like that, labels like that, and they sell the word hacked and chopped. And then they put down that it's from law enforcement authorities. Which law enforcement authorities? Are they connected to LAPD who are actively doing the case, or is it a friend of yours who's a law enforcement authority? Because usually when they know the facts, they'll say, police confirm this. I spoke to LAPD. This is what they're saying. But then when it's something that's just based on rumor, something that isn't substantiated, it becomes a very ambiguous authority. I could be a law enforcement authority at this point. They could have asked me and I could have gave something and that could have been the top. Well, based on a law enforcement authority, because they assume that we're going to think it's people directly related to the case. So you got to look at that. And then when you read the articles, as you start to see, when you get past the propaganda, you start to see the nuances and stuff, the caveats. Then you start to see where, okay, well, that's unique. They put confirmation by police. But then the one all the way at top here, the one that they used to get the clicks, was a law enforcement resource. I need to know more about that law enforcement resource. Could be just a rumor mill that they got from the online. So notably, early coverage for this case included details that, while factual, subtly cast suspicion towards David. All right, reports noted that, let me just get a picture of this so you guys see David. Sorry about that. Where are we, David? David and Celeste, there we are. Sorry about that, I showed you the wrong picture there. Let's see, David and Celeste, there they are. So, reports noted that police had searched the singer's Hollywood Hills home for blood evidence shortly after the body discovery. By highlighting that investigators obtained a warrant to scour his residence, outlets fed the public narrative that authorities took the possibility of David's involvement seriously. Of course, the car was registered. It makes sense. Similarly, TMZ and others dredged up sensational tangents. One TMZ piece even pointed out a resurfaced clip where David discussed an alter ego who murders people, and a TikTok comment accusing him of messing with a 13-year-old. Suggestive anecdotes that, while not proof of anything, amplified the cloud of suspicion in the court of public opinion. So they're feeding it in, and they're feeding it in aggressively. I mean, I remember them bringing up the alter ego one. I remember them bringing the tattoo. Even I covered that, but I provide two perspectives. I said the tattoo could have been something that was trending that she just tagged along with, or it could have been some level of obsession or control, to keep a secret because of what they were hiding. But with that said, I try my best to provide both parts. And if you read the article where it mentions the tattoo, I think it was like the third article they wrote on this, give or take, they put that they had matching tattoos, as I mentioned in my last video, as if they had proven that they have proof that David and Celeste agreed to do this together. But then when you go later in the article, it talks about how the tattoo is trending, how you find it in Rihanna, Lindsay Lohan, etc. So, I mean, maybe she's a fan of David, or she could have just put the tattoo on for the trend. But either way, we stayed objective, looking for context, because I think you can clearly say, hey, guys, it's a tattoo, but there's still no context. I mean, these are influencers. They have followers. People who are impressionable may try to kind of kick into some of these trends. So now the next point here is notice how the media presents these details. They're not making direct accusations. They're just reporting what others have said or what exists on social media. How does this attribution strategy allow outlets to imply guilt while maintaining legal defensibility? And here's the thing, guys. This is what gets to me. What they put for the clicks, what they put at the beginning is to get your interest. But then later on, as I mentioned, they write the nuances and the caveats. So when someone says, yo, you said that these were matching tattoos. I know, but later on in the article, towards the very bottom, we also said that this could have been something that was trending, because they know most people aren't going to read all the way to the bottom. They know people are going to jump at what's put right in front of them in red lights. Boom, boom, boom. And then maybe you get some people that click it and read the first paragraph a little less. But then the people that are reading towards the end, it's like this. So with that said, they bring out what they want to take the forefront to create their narrative. And then everything else below it is what can conflict. And by the way, usually it's a sentence or two, but it's there. And I will guarantee you, when you see these articles, there's a lot of things that come into play before the article gets finalized, because you're probably going to have a lot of people looking at it for different reasons. I would like to think some are factual, but I'm sure some of it's going to be, yo, we got to get attention on this. I need you to change that title. I need you to do something that's eye-popping. And then also, hey, be careful when you write that, because I know the lawyer. And if we put that out there like that, that's going to affect my relationship with the lawyer. I've even noticed some of these podcasts that I follow that I would consider good, strong resources at the time, now that I'm looking into this a little bit more, are sponsored by criminal defense lawyers. So how do we know they're not taking control of that public opinion and affecting how we view these crimes and the people that are doing it? Remember, guys, public opinion matters, because public opinion applies pressure, and pressure definitely affects people in politics. So it's kind of like this connection. You know, we do this to apply pressure. Pressure affects politics, and next thing you know, a person that should be obviously guilty starts with a question of doubt, and then we keep fueling the doubt until people start believing that they came up with that doubt on their own. When if you go back and read every article, you could start seeing where the doubt was introduced and then how they maintained the doubt along the way. Kind of makes me feel that they think we're not as smart, that they could just feed us things and we run with it. Sadly, I do see that happening, unfortunately, but hopefully now we can create a momentum in the right direction. Remember, I think that when you have a victim and you're trying to be a voice for the victim, I think it's also about where you can create an impact. And I think this is another area that I want to create an impact. And we did it for Manuel Harrow. We did it on runaways and how they could be manufactured by groomers. So that it's not so much they're a runaway, but they're being lured as opposed to being pushed out. And then even here, again, I went through every article here, and you guys got to check it out. If you go to TMZ, you could put Celeste Rivas Hernandez or put D4VD, and it'll show you the list of articles, and read them from the first article, which I think was the 9th, up to the most recent. And you'll see that there's subtle shifts. All right, so these tidbits exploited ambiguity bias. Okay, so I call it ambiguity bias. With the true cause of Celeste's death still unclear, ambiguous clues allowed imaginations to run wild. In reality, as of that time, cops have not revealed if they have a suspect, and the Los Angeles Police Department had not named D4VD David nor anyone else as an official suspect. But the absence of clear answers left a vacuum that early media reports filled with implication and intrigue. At the very beginning was about David, and they flooded us with information and conspiracy theories. And when they put a conspiracy theory, it was coming from a source. And I think really the media's got to be checked on. If you can't validate the source or let the public know that source, then how do we know you're not creating it? I think that has to be brought up, because sometimes they're going to run for the tabloids and they're going to say, well, this comes from a recognized law enforcement official. Not good enough. Don't put it out there. Don't put it out there, because it's not good enough. Who is that law enforcement resource, and how are they connected specifically to this case? Because what you're putting in there right now is specific and relevant. Like, I get that you may want perspectives in general. That's great. But when it starts to be applied specifically, you need people that are closest to it. And again, and I'm going to get to it, how they mark down these specific resources matter. Because again, as you look at the articles will note LAPD confirmed, police involved in this case confirmed. And then you got one that just says from law enforcement authorities. Where? Who? But people run with it because it's within that context. So when we encounter dramatic information without context, our brains don't simply wait for more data. They actively construct narratives based on existing schemas. So what we think we know about celebrity behavior or what's being influenced. Availability heuristics, so recent similar stories we've heard. And then confirmation bias, evidence that fits what we already suspect. And guys, have I seen that so much when it comes to when they switched the narrative and they started focusing on Celeste Rivas being a runaway from a troubled home and having fake IDs and people just taking the surface stuff and running with it. And now every time they're looking up something, they're looking up what confirms that belief. So then they wind up doing what the media wants done anyway. They keep it fueled. They see things in a way that truly is filtered through that belief of whatever's been painted in that narrative. And as you see, as the David case progresses, the Celeste Rivas case progresses, you see that shift. And then you see it being fueled by the many people who are saying they think they're doing objective research and they're not. I was very upset with this one gentleman who I was following very briefly, and I was enjoying his content until he went ahead and said, you know, and this is a cop saying that, yeah, children only run away for two things, because they're mental or they have a problematic home. Oh, come on. Had to wind up doing a whole show on that. They mostly run towards something. You have kids from good homes that run towards someone that's grooming them. And I know that very well. Not only do I know that through very intimate, intimate situation that I know of, I also worked at a female facility for 9 years, a female prison. And I worked very well with the females in there. And I know some of their stories. And most of them will tell you, you know, they weren't running away for something bad. They were lured. They were lured into something that they wanted. And again, and I mentioned this in the other show, so I'm not going to go too deep in this, but how does a family compete with David? Someone of that social status and troubled home. What's a troubled home to a teenager? And then later on, when they started looking like they had a clear, I think this is similar when the lawyer came on board. But all of a sudden now they may have to clear what they've already put out about David. So next thing you know, they get this, they interview one of her ex-boyfriends, which I did a video on this. What a wasted interview that was. What was that to do? That was really just to start shifting the narrative in the other direction about troubled home. The questions were so leading. You know, maybe, as I said before, good lawyers are because they're connected to the media somehow. Maybe she's only a good lawyer because she's connected to one of the producers of this, and she can control the headline to control that public opinion. Public opinion really does matter. So in the absence of facts, what story did your mind construct? Was David a predator, a victim of circumstance? What influenced that initial construction? So for me, guys, I didn't get involved or really started doing this case till after they discovered the body, and it was a 14-year-old girl, or again, she was discovered a day after her 15th birthday. So I kind of leaned into the topic, the title, but then I also was doing stuff that was a bit objective because, you know, when they were pushing the tattoo, because that came soon after, I remember saying, well, you know, but there could be many reasons why people have that. And I'm always thinking of so many different perspectives. So I really wasn't leaning so much at the point of them creating the narrative at that point, because I wasn't really truly connected to the case. But as I became truly connected, then I went back and looked. I was like, look at all this. Look how much it shifted. But at the point, I was being fair and very objective. But when they started painting the picture of all these connections with her and her age, and when they first communicated, I was like, hey, if this is fact, this guy's definitely out of line. and what he's been doing. She's been running to his house. She should be calling the family, or at least calling the police if it's a home where she's being abused. But then when it became about the abused home and her running away, I felt like they're painting this guy now as a hero when I already saw enough evidence there to see that this guy was way out of line with this relationship. It was pretty much clear today that this relationship was more than someone trying to help her out, because if that was the case, he would have went through the legal system when she started coming his way. But none of this was ever reported. So with that said, the picture was, in my mind, shifting. It went from him being a predator to maybe him being the savior, because the moment you start painting the runaway home, she's running away from home, then the person receiving her could easily be the hero in that narrative. And no, thank God at that point, I'll be honest with you, thank God the Reddit team, the sleuths on here, thank God they were continuing to push the narrative of, with the evidence that was true and verifiable, that no, this wasn't someone trying to be a hero. And then if you ask the right questions, you would clearly see he wasn't trying to be a hero. Because if I was a celebrity and she came my way, I'm probably going to call the local authorities. And if there is problems at the home, they can handle all that. But I'm going to go ahead and do the right thing. I'm not going to keep her at my house and trying to figure it out. So again, in the absence of facts, we entered that. However, as the investigation progressed and more context surfaced about Celeste's own life, the media narrative pivoted dramatically. Later coverage by TMZ and similar outlets shifted focus onto Celeste Rivas herself, particularly her troubled background, in a way that effectively reframed the victim's story. And somewhere along the line, this is where I think he gained counsel. An exclusive TMZ report on September 25th featured quotes from friends and insiders painting a very different picture from the initial singer linked to dead girl shocker. Friends who frequented the LA music scenes told TMZ they had seen Celeste and David together socially and assumed she was his 19-year-old girlfriend, even believing she was a USC college student. And in reality, Celeste at the time would have been only 13 or 14. This revelation was accompanied by law enforcement leaks that Celeste had been using multiple fake IDs to pass as an adult. Such details were prominently highlighted. One TMZ headline read, "Friends thought he was Celeste's boyfriend, shocked she was 14," emphasizing how Celeste allegedly deceived those around her about her age and identity. So now here's another question. Why does the fake ID detail appear so prominently in coverage, and who benefits from this information becoming central to the narrative? How does it change your perception of David's potential culpability? When this first came out, everybody's like, well, maybe she could have lied to David. Maybe she had these fake IDs. Now, right there is when I started feeling the shift. Wait a second, what are we doing here? I mean, even if she lied or not, he's still culpable. But now we're pushing the narrative that she had these fake IDs. In one part of the article, it said the fake IDs is how she got around. No, when she was running away from home, he was providing her the comfort. He was providing her the means. The reason why she was able to repeatedly run away from home is because she had somewhere to go to. But when she was, even if she had the fake IDs, I don't know if that's really even been confirmed, but even if she had the fake IDs, that doesn't make him less culpable. But they sold the story as if, well, the friends were duped. And maybe David was duped. And they knew they couldn't say David because they know probably people that break the law when it comes to sex offenses, usually their first excuse is going to be what? I thought she was older. Or I met her at a bar where you're supposed to be 21. And because that's such a common excuse, it's the go-to excuse. Guess what happens? It loses its relevance. And the funny thing, even if they said, well, I met her at a bar, there goes the third party responsibility, still a shift. So they knew they couldn't have David say it. So they put it around his friends, his social network. But ultimately, what they did was they blamed her. They quickly turned the script around and they said she had fake IDs. Everybody thought she was 19. They may not have clearly said she was at fault, but they're planting They're slowly planting. They're slowly starting to shift the blame. So that brings us to the anatomy of victim blaming. So by stressing that she presented herself as older and gained access to 18 plus parties by fraud, the coverage subtly suggested that David might have been unwittingly involved with a minor rather than deliberately preying on one. This is a classic example of victim reframing, reflecting the narrative toward the victim's actions or circumstances in a way that can mitigate blame attributed to the more famous party. And guys, I did a great video. You guys have to watch it. It's about parasocial relationships, but parasocial and tear talk. And we explore when that parasocial relationship collapses. When you have a fan who truly is infatuated or truly admires a celebrity, or in this case here, influencer, and the influencer messages them back. That is a very new dynamic right now. And you got to look at that parasocial collapse. So the implicit message is Celeste was not a random innocent child in the wrong place, but a troubled teen who sought out an adult scene using fake identities. If you read the article, especially what's at top, that's what it looks like. So here's some ethical reflection here. Even if Celeste did use fake IDs and lie about her age, how does that information really help us understand what happened to her? Does it matter to the central question of who caused her death? Why or why not? I mean, if it's related to the connection, you know, maybe it has some relevance, but that wasn't how this was framed. This was framed when they were starting to make some distance for David, starting to give him some excuses as well. So how this was introduced mattered. This wasn't introduced in trying to find out where she frequented. This was introduced as she's got fake IDs. No one thought she was 14. This was introduced in an effort to shift blame. And therefore, when you read that article and how it's presented, it tries to get people to now sympathize in case there is a relationship beyond the simple connection to her being in his car. Because again, we know there was a connection, but how deep is this relationship? So when they know that there's enough evidence, so now what are they going to do? They're going to try to minimize some level of accountability. Remember, that's kind of like the order, right? The evidence is against somebody. Because if you think about it, if you watch the pattern that the media takes, it's no different than I think what you would find on a defense team, on someone that's a criminal lawyer. You know, first you question the evidence, and when the evidence is damning, you question the credibility or the due process. And when that goes too far, then you look to minimize accountability. I kind of see that here. You know, and now they already set the thing up where they put the evidence out there, but now for some reason they're going to backtrack on that story. And I think it's really in line with the connection to this lawyer. Again, maybe not, but just going to put it out there like they do, no different. And all of a sudden, now it's going to be blaming someone else. And the family is a third party, technically. Well, she ran away from home because it was trouble. That's a distraction. Oh, she had IDs, a distraction. Unless the IDs are going to point us to a place where she could have met somebody that killed her, that's a distraction. Because they know in the end there's a relationship here that was illegal. And now, before David can even speak his side, we have to clear this mess first. That's why probably he's quiet right now. He's quiet right now because if he opens up the door to even his innocence on the ladder, you still got the connection. So now the media's got to minimize that connection so David can open up a bit more. So let's see. So again, I want to talk about the trouble home narrative real quick again. So hand in hand with the fake ID angle came reports delving into Celeste Rivas Hernandez's personal and family. It came out almost simultaneously, which further reshaped public sentiment. Media outlets, again, often led by TMZ's exclusives, reported that Celeste had a history of running away from home. LAPD homicide detective tracked Celeste's history and found evidence she came from a troubled home. By the way, if you read that article, that resource is very vague, which they believe triggered her desire to run away. In fact, law enforcement sources revealed to TMZ that she had run away multiple times in 2024 and that her family had filed missing person reports on at least 3 occasions. One TMZ article headline explicitly announced Celeste Rivas' death investigation focused on runaway past troubled home, signaling this new emphasis. Details followed. A middle school teacher confirmed Celeste fled home in January of 2024 and was found by police a month later, then disappeared again in April. I don't know if that's correct. I think the dates are more like February. Bear with me on that one. The pattern painted Celeste as a teen in turmoil, a narrative that garners sympathy for her plight, but also steers the storyline away from David as an active perpetrator. If anything, it raised questions about what personal difficulties led Celeste into dangerous situations. And all of a sudden, there was just a bunch of articles coming out, and then you also had the interview with the ex-boyfriend around that time, claiming troubled home. Well, what would a troubled home really mean? And I got active on that, and I quickly did a video because, what does troubled home mean to a 14-year-old girl or a 13-year-old girl? And you notice no one was really clear as to what troubled home meant. They just ran with the term troubled home. But there was no context there. They allowed us to think of the context, but they're putting stuff in there, to make us think, and not outright, but there is. And we automatically think troubled home could be abusive or all this. It could have been just rules, or maybe you have a family that's under stress because they need money, or maybe they went through a divorce. And they also had another article about the police went to the house 11 times. It looks like those times are related to her running away. So maybe that amount of times is how much the family cared for their daughter. Maybe they were calling the police multiple times because they had leads, or they wanted to check things, or they just, needed more help. They got an update maybe. Again, no context there, but the narrative's already been painted that she came from a troubled home. So now they point the 11 times the police came to the home. And if you read the article, somewhere along the lines, very vague, but you start to see could have been in time with her running away. But again, look at the beginning and look at the paragraph underneath. So 14-year-old girl. So just some discussion questions real quick. I just want to give you 2 framings real quick for you to think of. 14-year-old girl found dead in celebrity's car, or troubled runaway with fake IDs found dead after fleeing home multiple times. Because if you put all this together, the latter is what's being painted. So again, it's no longer a 14-year-old girl found dead in a celebrity's car. It's kind of shifting to troubled runaway with fake IDs found dead after fleeing home multiple times. Same facts, radically different implications. Which version makes David seem more culpable, and which makes Celeste's death seem more like a tragic inevitability? Because at the very beginning, we had the 14-year-old girl found dead in celebrity's car, but then the narrative shifted. And if you start putting all this together, and then you go back and let's say they decided to change the title of that very first story that they put out, or maybe later on when they discovered the body and who it was when they identified the body, maybe it would have been troubled runaway with fake IDs found dead after fleeing home multiple times. Because that's kind of, I feel, what it's leaning towards. And you want to hear something funny, guys? I'm sure they know a lot more. And since they are the one that's creating the narrative, how do we know that they released the evidence in a timely manner? How do we know that they're releasing it objectively, or they wait until they could paint a spin? How do we know that when they get their sources and they get their true information, that they don't filter it through the defense side so they could spin a narrative to help create a better public opinion of whoever that lawyer is representing? Could that be happening? Do you guys think that happens? That when they get information, they hold it until they can try to spin it? So the language used in these later reports, as I mentioned, the one I just said above, is telling. Phrases like law enforcement sources tell TMZ or we're told preface many of the new revelations, signaling that the outlet was selectively releasing insider info from police or insiders. This lends an aura of credibility and urgency, as if the stories were evolving in real time, while also allowing law enforcement narratives to reach the public unofficially. For instance, TMZ broke the story. Law enforcement sources say Celeste has multiple fake IDs. Or, as we reported, law enforcement says Celeste ran away multiple times from a troubled home. By attributing these statements to official sources, the media justified the shift in focus. It wasn't merely gossip to discuss Celeste's personal troubles. It was part of the investigation. So basically, they're able to say it without scrutiny because they lean on law enforcement investigations. Who confirmed that? I mean, as I said, I could be a law enforcement authority. I want to talk about media literacy. Here's a question for you guys. When you see law enforcement sources or sources close to the investigation, who do you imagine these sources are? Could they be David's legal team? Could they be police who have a relationship with TMZ? How does the anonymous nature of sourcing affect the information's credibility? I mean, they can lean on the expert. It doesn't mean they're relevant to the case. So, I mean, when they can confirm something and they can release it because it doesn't shift their narrative, they'll let you know it was confirmed by LAPD or LA Homicide. But if it's something that they just want to put out there because they want to stir a narrative or they want to kind of get a rumor for headlines, law enforcement authority said, well, who? Who is that law enforcement authority that you keep going to? I think if you are going to print something and put something out there that could affect a huge perspective, you got to be a little bit more solid with those sources. And guys, if you're watching it, those are the questions we need to ask. Because if we don't start asking them, these people will run with everything. And if there's not enough sources there that are valid in your opinion, stop reading it. Because at the end of the day, it's only going to shift your perspective on a narrative that they're choosing to create. So look at that next time you read it. Note it. How come, look for the pattern. How come later on you got confirmation from police, LAPD, something more specific. But up here, it's law enforcement authorities or my law enforcement resources. It's like a shift. So we even saw quotes from unnamed friends when they did the University of the IDs and her being a University of Southern California student. Sources who party in the LA music scene recounted seeing Celeste at age-restricted parties with David and the people buzzing about what they saw, expressed shock at the connection of her death, given David's gentle demeanor. The inclusion of such commentary served a dual purpose. It humanized David, painting him as shy and gentle, an unlikely killer, and simultaneously positioned Celeste as a precocious teen immersing herself in an adult world. In effect, the public narrative was being massaged from an implicit whodunit with David at the center into a more complex story of a wayward youth whose fate, while tragic, might not involve a homicide at all. But who are these friends? Who are these people at an LA music scene? Not one of them wants to go on record. They just want to tell you off record. Well, then you know what? If you can't get a credible source, there's no way that can be contested. So I think it's risky when you start printing that. So by late September and early October, the media tone had almost flipped. Coverage noted that LAPD had not determined any criminal culpability beyond the concealment of her body, meaning it was unclear if a homicide had even occurred. Speculation in the press, including by a Fox 11 TV report, floated theories that Celeste may have died of an overdose and that someone panicked and hid her body to cover up an illicit relationship. By the way, if you look at my other video, we covered all the different motives. That kind of conjecture, aired by a private investigator, that's SF, in an interview, again, served to downplay the likelihood of a murdered act by the homeowner, David. Even the phrasing, "no arrest have been made," was emphasized in coverage. A reminder to readers that despite the scandalous beginning of the story, authorities have not charged David or anyone else. In other words, the sensational crime that many assumed, a famous singer killing a teen fan or lover, was now highly in doubt. So look at the first article. Look at the one that came out when they ID'd her somewhere, I think maybe the 19th, I forget, but soon after. And then you could start seeing the shift. Because after those first two set of articles came out, They're aggressively towards one side with enough evidence, and all of a sudden now it's shifting to the other side. So trace your own evolution or belief through the timeline. If you followed this story in real time, how did your judgment of David change from week 1 to week 4? That's important. If you're reading this for the first time with all information presented at once, how does that compressed timeline affect your judgment? So again, go back, TMZ, look at those articles, and look at the shift. I want to talk about the primacy versus recency effect. And media is very well aware of this. From a media psychology perspective, this evolution in coverage showcases how outlets manipulate primacy and recency in storytelling. The initial reports create a lasting first impression. David's car, body and trunk, suspicious circumstances. That grabbed worldwide attention. This is the primacy effect at work. People tend to remember and trust the first information they learn. Only later, once that hook was set, did media introduce mitigating context, and those later details often don't completely erase the initial bias, though they attempt to rebalance the narrative. Now remember, guys, when that initial bias is set, if someone starts to put facts in, people now have to kind of adjust their facts to some extent to fit that initial bias that they have. And then true facts wind up getting lost because for most people, it becomes, it just doesn't balance right. So the facts now have to compete with these obstacles because someone either rushed to get the story out there or just wanted to create their own narrative. So most people will just find a way to continue the narrative when people like us that are really voicing for the victim, we don't let that fact get discredited because there was an obstacle put into place at the very beginning. The fact speaks more truth than any obstacle of a rushed coverage. So TMZ, for example, blared the incriminating facts early, even digging up old school media drama about David, and then in follow-up exclusives position itself as correcting the record with new info about Celeste's age and past. Look at that shift. This can lead to ambiguity or confirmation bias in the audience. So readers inclined to exonerate David will lean on the later reports of Celeste's troubled life, whereas those initially convinced of his guilt might treat the new info with skepticism. He still had a dead girl in his car. So here's the thinking for us. The media structure and facts thus both guide and reflect public perception. By the story's later stages, terms like runaway and troubled home, fake IDs, and not clear foul play began overshadowing the earlier narrative of young girl found dead with a singer. This victim blaming or victim reframing isn't overt. No one explicitly blames Celeste for her fate, but the emphasis on her behavior subtly shifted the question from what did David do to Celeste to what was Celeste doing in David's world to begin with. And I found myself asking that question, and that's where I found conflict in myself. So the ethical question here, is it ever appropriate to investigate a victim's background when they can't defend themselves or provide context? Where is the line between relevant investigation and character assassination? And that, to me, matters. If you want to look at the background, if it's relevant to who is the person that could be responsible for her death at some level or the concealment, I get it. But that wasn't done for these reasons. They did it to assassinate someone who does not have a voice at this time. Again, I'm not saying it's not relevant. It totally could be relevant if it's helping us find answers. But this was a character assassination on someone that can't speak. I want to go for case number 2 real quick. And guys, I did a lot of videos on this. You're going to love the one that me and Russ Hamilton did, where we really break it down. I even showcased some videos, and I kind of focused a lot more on the reports as well. I was clicking it through, but I want to follow this because this shows you another area where I saw it. And it's the Mark Sanchez case. And again, when the aggressor bleeds, and there's the... there he is. I also updated some new video that came from TMZ related to this. Oh, by the way, guys, here's a picture of Blair Burke. That's the one that's now representing David. She's represented a lot of famous people. And again, it could be just her way she can control public perspective. I mean, to be honest with you, when you have a defense lawyer and the evidence is so damning, you know, it's crazy how some people are able to say, well, that lawyer must be really good. No, the lawyer could just have a connection to the media. and they help create narratives that put it into the public, and the public applies pressure. Pressure affects politics and whatnot. So for this case, surveillance footage still it's timestamped around 12:14 a.m. showing Mark Sanchez wandering unsteadily in a downtown alley before the altercation. Media outlets use such video to piece together a chaotic timeline of events. So now, guys, this is the initial report that came out October 4th. The case of Mark Sanchez, a former NFL quarterback and current TV analyst, provides a fascinating inverse example of narrative shifting. Here, the celebrity himself was injured in a violent incident, stabbed multiple times during a late-night confrontation in Indianapolis, and coverage evolved from shock and confusion to a more detailed account that, interestingly, tended to emphasize the chaotic circumstances rather than paint Sanchez simply as a perpetrator. In doing so, the media walked the fine line between acknowledging evidence that Sanchez was the aggressor and maintaining a sympathetic tone toward the well-known sports figure. This demonstrates how framing and language choices can influence whether the public sees someone as a reckless criminal, or as an unfortunate victim of mayhem, even when that person actually faces charges. And guys, you got to see the videos I've done on this, because we explore this a little bit more deeper than I'm going to do today, but I'm still going to cover some of this. So the first question, before reading further, consider, when a famous person is both the aggressor and badly injured, which identity wins in your mind? The celebrity you recognize, or the person who committed the assault? So again, this matters, because I even talked in an earlier video how, people have an idea of who they think these celebrities are, and in some cases, maybe you do have some nice celebrities. I get it. But in some cases, you may not. And sometimes when people are shocked that someone did something, it's not because they know them personally. They know the performance they play in front of the camera. Be honest with you, nice is not genuine. Nice is performative. Oh, he's such a nice celebrity. Okay, that's performative. So we really don't know too much about these celebrities. We don't. We have an idea of who they are because the camera's constantly on them, but we truly don't know who they really are. So in this case here, when a famous person is both the aggressor and badly injured, which identity wins in your mind? The celebrity you recognize, or the person who committed assault? I'm asking that question to you guys. What came first? And I think the media quickly, they had context here. I think TMZ had context here, but they ran with the story that he was he was stabbed. They ran with the story that he was the victim. Now look at look at how much now, when the truth comes out, the obstacle that's going to be. Because there are still people that believe he's the victim, questioning Perry Toll's need to defend himself. I got one lawyer that was on a show we talked about yesterday that was on Ashley Banfield's show that said, yeah, well, he brought two weapons to a fight and it was a fist fight. No, it wasn't a fight. It wasn't an altercation. The Perry Toll was assaulted. Perry Toll defended himself. But if you can minimize this perspective through altercation or through that he's the victim, Sanchez is the victim, then you no longer see Perry Toll as the victim, and you no longer see Perry Toll as needing what he needed to defend himself. Pepper spray didn't work. Then he went ahead and used the knife. The lawyer that was on Ashley Banfield's show was unique because the lawyer pretty much said, yeah, and he's the one that brought two weapons. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, if this was to ever go to trial, which I don't know, me and Russ don't think it will, but if it ever was to go to trial, if you expect to push that to a jury and you expect them to believe it, I just think it's so insulting. It really is. It's really insulting to think that we would believe that. It's like the stuff that they throw out there is like, oh, that's simple. The public will believe that. The public will believe that. Well, not no more, hopefully. Hopefully, this is the bigger impact that we can make through Celeste Rivas and through Perry Toll. So early reports about the incident were remarkably neutral in tone, yet dramatic in content. On October 4th, TMZ was first to break the news that Mark Sanchez had been stabbed and rushed to a hospital in critical condition. The headline, Mark Sanchez stabbed in Indianapolis, hospitalized with severe injuries, delivered the most startling fact up front, ensuring maximum reader stock. They didn't say why, just said he was stabbed. Painted a picture that he was the victim. Now, again, if you're going to introduce facts, you're introducing facts to an already created narrative. And that makes it extremely hard to do. You ran with a story to either be the first to say it, or let's be honest, because I'm seeing a pattern here, to create a narrative. And now when true facts come in, you know, you're going to be the filter for that. So you keep the narrative going and minimize everything else that could cause conflict to that. I don't say they outright disregard it because they know they can't, but they minimize it. And that, to me, is where the ethical concern lies, because you're not lying, but you're minimizing the impact that this fact should have on your created narrative. Crucially, these initial descriptions cast Sanchez primarily as a victim. He was the one stabbed and severely hurt, and it was unclear what led to the violent incident. That lack of immediate explanation is an example of ambiguity in reporting. Without a clear narrative of who started the fight or why, the mind will fill in the blanks. And then all they got to do is continue the momentum. Many might assume Sanchez was attacked or caught in random violence, especially since police at the time called it an isolated incident, but gave no details of cause. Now, an isolated incident doesn't mean it's a fight with 50% responsibility or accountability on both sides. It just means that it could have been an assault, but it's not connected to anything ongoing. It just looks like it was done there. The first impression delivered to the public, Mark Sanchez, beloved former quarterback, nearly killed in a stabbing, and that framing naturally elicits concerns and sympathy. So I want a comparative question here. So compare this to the DVD case, the David case. In both situations, media led with the celebrity's connection to violence. But notice the framing. Body found in David's car versus Sanchez stabbed. One centers the celebrity as possessor of evidence, the other as a victim of violence. How does this initial framing create completely different emotional responses? Because remember, the first thing about David was surely about headlines until that lawyer got involved, I believe, and then you started to see the shift and then the pulling back. But it wasn't an outright pullback. It was gradual. Again, if something was to come out all at once, you would feel the shock. Anybody would feel the shock and say, yo, that doesn't make sense. But they do it gradually so they can get you to buy into it. And you don't even know that you shifted your perspective until it's shifted. Sad to say, but it's true. Where Sanchez was painted as it's still kind of the same, but painted as a victim. But they're gonna have to try to now minimize any fact that goes against it. So basically, what they tend to do is, still keep the title with that momentum going, and maybe even the beginning parts of the story, because again, you have the caveats and the nuances later on. But their objective now is to keep that picture painted. And look at the words that they choose. And I'm going to get to that, guys, because that's extremely important. When you read an article, you have to look at the choice of words. Every word in an article has been chosen. Remember, it goes through multiple editors. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the editors filtering? And I could tell you right now, it could be facts, obviously. That could be part of it. But it could also be how those facts are presented. Who are we going to piss off? Who puts money into our pocket that we could affect if we do the story this way? So it wasn't until later. Where am I? So it wasn't until later that day and the next that the picture became clear that Sanchez himself had allegedly instigated the altercation, but by then the emotional foundation was already set. So as more information trickled out, outlets like TMZ, Fox News, and People updated the story with surveillance footage and official statements, gradually shifting the narrative from pure victimhood to a more complex chain of events. Still, the way this was done often gave the sense that Sanchez was at the center of a chaotic night rather than portraying him as a calculated assailant. Remember, guys, evidence is against him. So what did I say? You could question the credibility, the due process, or you minimize the facts. Hey, I can't negate the fact that he was in a fight, right? I mean, it could be an assault, but guess what? We could also make it a fight. Let him prove it was an assault. And the scary thing is about all this is the same structure I would see in a defense is what I'm seeing in these reports, in what the media is sending. So I definitely feel that there's a connection somehow. because I just see it. It kind of translates. For instance, TMZ Sports obtained multiple surveillance videos and described Sanchez's behavior in the minutes leading up to the stabbing in vivid detail. He spent about 20 minutes roaming and at times stumbling around downtown. One clip showed him appearing intoxicated, drunkenly wandering up and down an alley, pausing and lurking in a manner, the TMZ article said, bizarre maneuvers. Now, mind you, if you watch the video that I showed yesterday, they're going to show you an interview that they had with the prosecutor, Ryan Mears, of this case, and watch the reporter. You guys got to watch that video, because in that video, look at the questions that she asked. She first tries to question the treatment of Sanchez. Was he interviewed like you interviewed Perry Toll, etc.? But then she starts questioning the evidence, starts talking about the cameras, the witnesses, but then she starts talking about being intoxicated. And maybe he wasn't himself. So now they're at that point where they're trying to minimize accountability. And when that didn't work, you go to third party. Third party on falsifiable conspiracy. Could he have been drugged? Now that's the story that gets pushed. And I saw that story pushed again on the Ashley Banfield show about possibly being drugged. Now, Ryan Mears, when he was interviewed the first time, he said, yeah, I mean, it's all likely, but it hasn't been brought up yet. You know, so I mean, you figured that would have been probably been brought up at this point, but it hasn't. So again, this is the road that gets taken, right? Even in the effort to minimize, you could find third-party involvement. I think you even seen that with Kohlberger. When they know the evidence is so damning, they'll put anything out there in the hopes that you have to disprove it. And that's not the case all the time. It's an unfalsifiable conspiracy. At the point I have reasonable suspicion, whatever, it's here. I have enough evidence here to hold you to this. You now have to show the evidence it was that third party. And if you can't produce that evidence, we're not running with it. Because then at the end of the day, you'd be doing that all day. That third party unfalsifiable conspiracy shows up all the time when people are backed in a corner. I want you to notice the careful word choices in the coverage I just mentioned. Even though I think that this article they're talking about was the most objective when it came to Mark Sanchez compared to the other ones, it's still not perfect. So stumbling suggests loss of control versus working with intent. Because again, this is about minimizing now. They know the evidence is there. So this is about minimizing. So they're hoping that they could show that he wasn't himself. Wandering, so aimless and confused versus approaching or stalking. Bizarre maneuvers, strange but not threatening versus aggressive behavior, which is dangerous. And then roaming, almost animal-like, instinctual versus searching for confrontation, which is deliberate. And I want to talk about language analysis. So imagine an identical surveillance footage of an unknown person exhibiting the same behavior. Would media describe it as stumbling around or suspiciously lurking? How does celebrity status change the interpretive lens we apply to the exact same behavior? Let me just read that again. If imagine identical surveillance footage of an unknown person exhibiting the same behavior, would media describe it as stumbling around, or would they explain it as suspiciously lurking? How does celebrity status change the interpretive lens we apply to the exact same behavior? If you look at the video with Ashley Banfield, the first thing she mentions when she talks to the lawyer is how celebrities may get an unfair shake. And we all know that's not true. Celebrities have all the resources in the world to benefit them, so they don't get an unfair shake. The average Joe does. The driver here does. Perry Toll does. By narrating the video this way, the coverage established the scene as confusing and erratic. The reader watches through the reporter's words as Sanchez wobbles in and out of frame, interacts briefly with passerby, and then jogs towards the eventual confrontation. Could have been premeditated. I even said that in my video. How do we know he's not chasing after him at that point? Behavior more indicative of disoriented man than a clear-headed aggressor. And by the way, this was the more objective ones. And after watching the video a little more, after I put the video up and I went back and rewatched the video and read the thing, I was like, you know what? I want to put this back out again, because maybe it's not as objective as I thought, but it is still considered to me the better objective one, but it's still off if you really look at the play on words, and those words matter. It may not be as objective as I thought when I first looked at it. These descriptive choices are not necessarily exculpatory, but they do inject a sense of ambivalence. Was Sanchez merely drunk and stumbling around or aggressively hunting for trouble? The portrayal leans towards the former until proven otherwise. And guys, remember, guys, this is about minimizing now. The strategic value of chaos. Framing an incident as chaotic serves multiple narrative functions. Diffuses responsibility, because in chaos, no one's in full control. Invites sympathy. Chaos happens to people. They don't create it. And even Trump had said something like it was like a character reference, but he said, yeah, it's a tough incident. He basically did not put any accountability to Sanchez, and then also gave a conditional, like, yeah, he's a good guy from what I know of him. Like that, there was a conditional statement. Remember that, guys. Sometimes when people are uncomfortable of saying something, they may provide a qualifier. So maybe he wanted to say he was a great guy, but he just felt uncomfortable saying that, and he adds a qualifier. Conditional. Suggest unpredictability. Who can judge what they do in chaos? And then minimizes intent. Chaotic actions are reactive, not planned. So here's the discussion question for here, guys. Think about times you've heard the word chaotic. Again, used to describe violence. Does chaotic imply that blame is shared? That circumstances, not people, are responsible? And how does this framing protect certain actors while obscuring accountability? I agree with that. I think chaotic is more situational. So it does put less pressure on the parties that are involved. I also think altercation, that word that was being used. When I see altercation, I mean, whatever it truly means, it's just when I see altercation, I see 50-50. 50%, 50%. This clearly wasn't 50%. It was 100% to 0. When it came to the actual clash between Sanchez and the other man, Perry Toll, a 69-year-old truck driver, the media relied heavily on official accounts. Note the repeated attributions, guys, you know what me words, but basically attribute, like police say, and according to court documents, this not only butters the story's credibility, it also creates a buffer for delivering potentially damning information about Sanchez's actions. Well, the police said this, or the police said that, but now again, if he is responsible, it's because the police said it. This is what's in the reports. But yet, when it's against the victim, they'll say whatever they want. They're just more concerned when they say it about the celebrity. For example, TMZ's follow-up coverage stated, police say this is the time between 12:25 a.m. and 12:30 a.m. when Sanchez pulled Toll out of his truck, prompting Toll to pepper spray and stab Sanchez. I want you guys to pay attention, because I caught that too again when I relooked at this. When they got to say something negative because they want to appear on the surface as being objective, they may defer. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to have to say, but say the police say it. But yet, when you want to talk about the victim, that can come from unknown sources. That can come from anywhere. That can come from your thoughts. But when it was against Sanchez, we'll put it on the police. The police said it, so I have to report that. In one succinct sentence, we learned that according to authorities, Sanchez was actually the initial aggressor. He yanked an innocent man from his vehicle, and that the stabbing was in self-defense. But by couching this in police says, the article reports the facts without directly condemning Sanchez in the outlet's own voice. You know that there was a part in what we covered yesterday that they said that, yeah, obviously this is going to go in the benefit of Perry Toll because of like the Castle doctrine, the stand your own ground. That's not why it goes into the benefit. He was a victim. You know, don't shoot because I guess there's complications with that stand your own ground law. But in the end, he was the victim. That's why it's going to go in his favor. And guys, you got to really look at that video. So why does police say Sanchez attacked the man feel less damning than Sanchez attacked the man? What psychological distance does attribution, that's what I wanted for, attribution, create between the reader and the information? Does it make the information feel more like allegation than fact? I have a feeling with the way, unfortunately, sometimes police view things, or the way police are viewed, that if people are really trusting these tabloids, then they may have more say than what the police say, unfortunately. So, and also it helps them. If the lawyer said, hey, that thing you wrote about Sanchez, hey, guys, I didn't say that. The police said it. So, but, you know, if Perry Toll had that problem, they would be more than happy to, attack him. If Perry Toll was the aggressor in this case, they would be all over it and just in a different way. But right now, this is recovery. That's all this is. Recovery and minimization. It's a subtle linguistic dance. The outlets isn't accusing him. They're just relaying the claims of law enforcement. Similarly, People magazine coverage cited court documents and police statements that outline how Sanchez allegedly escalated a parking dispute, shoved the older man, and even prevented him from calling for help. The driver told police he feared Sanchez was trying to kill him, hence he fought back with pepper spray and a knife. These are grave details that cast Sanchez as the antagonist, yet notably, such specifics were often mid-article or later after the initial emphasis on Sanchez's injury. That matters, right? Because that's the nuance. That's the caveats they put all the way down in the middle or towards the end. I want to talk about the inverted pyramid as a weapon here. So the structuring again reflects the inverted pyramid. The most eye-catching aspect, the celebrity stabbing and hospitalization, came first, while the full context that the celebrity may have caused the incident emerged further down the story or in subsequent reports. So how many people do you think read past the headlines and first paragraph? Studies suggest 60 to 70% of readers never scroll past the opening. So if you're TMZ and you know most readers stop after paragraph 1, how does that knowledge shape what information you put where? I mean, is this ethical journalism? Is it? The narrative I want to create, put that up top. And again, guys, think about what the editors are looking for. I want to revisit what the editors look for. So when an editor reviews a story at a place like TMZ, it isn't just about facts. The real question is, what narratives are we creating and how will it land with the public? The first thing they look at is the headline. This is the hook, the emotional anchor. It has to grab attention instantly, putting the celebrity's name up front, framing them as either victim, villain, or mystery. Editors know most readers never make it past the first paragraph, so the opening line becomes the permanent story. Then comes language choices. Words like stumbling instead of lurking, alleged victim instead of grandfather, or sources say instead of police confirm. I mean, think about that. Perry Toll's a grandfather, supposed to go to, or at least a father, supposed to go to his son's wedding, and that stuff. Even if it's even in the TMZ articles, I don't think I saw it, but it could be. It would be somewhere towards the bottom or the end, or maybe someone else reported it. I know it came from somewhere, but it wasn't up front. It didn't say Perry Toll's list of injuries right before going to his son's wedding. I mean, they did release something about him being a nice guy because I guess one of his family or friends wrote something, so they did go with it. But again, the narrative's already been created, so they kind of may release something after the fact because they know they already got enough momentum going in the other direction. And by the way, these aren't accidental, these choice of words. They soften or sharpen perception without exposing the outlet to lawsuits. Every verb, every adjective is a tool for shaping bias. I want to talk about attribution matters. Law enforcement sources, friends close to the investigation, insiders. These vague phrases allow the story to carry weight while keeping the outlet legally insulated. It feels authoritative, even if it's just one person with an agenda. So these are what the editors are looking at. Editors also know the image do half the work. Which photo you run can swing the narrative. A celebrity smiling versus looking disheveled. A victim in a cap and gown versus a victim at a party. Readers feel before they think, and editors exploit that. But here's the hidden factor: sponsorship and image management. If a story paints a celebrity as irredeemable too quickly, it can scare off advertisers and partners who fuel the entire media ecosystem. That's why you'll often see pivots, initial shock followed by humanizing follow-ups. A scandal can draw clicks, but dragging a star too deep can also kill future coverage value. Outlets need their celebrities alive, narratively and financially. Finally, there's timing. Stories are sequenced like episodes of a show. The shocking drop, the chaotic middle, the exclusive update, the sympathetic close. Editors don't just break news, they pace it, sketch it, and redirect it to maximize clicks while margining fallout. In the end, the job isn't about the truth, it's about control. An editor decides which facts to emphasize, which to bury, and how to phrase them so the reader walks away with the right impression. And that impression, fair or not, is what sponsors, fans, and even courts will remember. So now I want to get to, again, we're talking about the inverted pyramid. So again, the structuring, again, reflects the inverted pyramid. The most eye-catching aspect, the celebrity stabbing and hospitalization came first, while the full context that the celebrity may have caused the incident emerged further down the story or in subsequent reports. So how many people, okay, we read that. How many people do you think read past the title and the first paragraph? And it's around 30%. That means 60 to 70% never scroll past the opening. The most damning facts that Sanchez climbed into someone's vehicle, that he attacked an elderly man doing his job, that his victim thought he was going to die, were buried beneath layers of Sanchez hospitalized and investigation ongoing. So I want to talk about the grammar of evasion. Language patterns across outlets consistently use neutral or passive construction about the incidents, which has the effect of diffusing direct blame. Phrases like a physical disturbance took place and both men were injured appeared in news write-ups rather than explicitly Sanchez attacked the man and was stabbed in return. And we talked about that yesterday. It makes it look like both parties are accountable. So I want to talk about active versus passive voice. Okay, so I want you to listen to the differences here. Consider these framings. Active voice shows clear responsibility. Sanchez attacked Toll, who defended himself with a knife. The former quarterback assaulted a delivery driver. Sanchez climbed into a stranger's truck and began beating him. Now look at the passive voice now, what we've been seeing, which is a level of diffusing responsibility. A physical disturbance occurred. For me, the altercation, I hate that word, for this context. Both men sustained injuries during the incident, and violence erupted in a parking dispute. Look at the lack of accountability. Look at the passive versus active. Active puts accountability, passive splits it. I want to talk about grammar exercise. So read each version aloud, as I just mentioned. Notice how the passive version don't technically lie, but they fundamentally reshape how you assign blame. Which version appears in most coverage and why? So again, just to, if you read through the articles, check this out. Active is Sanchez attacked Toll, who defended himself with a knife. I didn't see that once. The former quarterback assaulted a delivery driver. I didn't see that. The word assaulted there, didn't see it. Sanchez climbed into a stranger's truck and began beating him. We saw that he went into the truck. They couldn't deny that. There's even surveillance in that truck. But the latter began beating him. Didn't see that. This is what I more saw. This is more passive. I saw a physical disturbance occurred. I've seen that. Both men sustained injuries during the incident. Seen that. Or altercation. And violence erupted in a parking dispute. Saw that as well. Fox 13 News, for instance, summarized the event with bullet points. Police said 2 men were hurt in a fight early Saturday. Sanchez remains in the hospital. Prosecutors are reviewing charges. This wording informs the reader that something violent happened and that it's under legal review, but it doesn't immediately single out blame, an approach that likely spared Sanchez's fans some shock until the legal reality caught up. So when you hear 2 men were hurt in a fight, does your mind automatically assume both bear equal responsibility? How does this phrasing protect the actual aggressor by creating a false equivalence? Another common refrain in early reports was that no charges have been filed, yet indeed, over the first weekend, Sanchez was arrested but not formally charged with a felony until prosecutors saw the full evidence on Monday. News updates highlighted that the case was ongoing. Authorities were still investigating. No final charges at the time. This no charges filed emphasis can sometimes imply caution, suggesting that perhaps it was just a chaotic incident with no clear criminal intent, at least initially. Of course, that changed once video and witness accounts were analyzed. And they did the misdemeanor, not because it was a small thing, but because they wanted to give them something until they could fully validate what they saw. And then those charges could still go up. I mean, right now we're at a felony charge, but he could still go up. It's got to, get in touch with the doctors, see what type of damage was occurred to this gentleman. That's long-term. So by emphasizing the lag between arrest and charges, media created a buffer zone where Sanchez could still be discussed without the full weight of criminal defendant attached to him. This is particularly valuable for celebrity reputation management, as each day without formal charges allows continued employment. Fox initially didn't suspend him immediately. Public sympathy to build. Let's wait for all those facts. Alternative narratives to circulate. Maybe it was mutual combat. And the celebrity PR team to shape the emerging story. And so here's another question. If this were an unknown person arrested for the same crime, would media emphasize no charges filed yet, or would they lead with arrested for assault? And how does celebrity status affect this editorial choice? So by the next week, so we're talking about October 7th to the 10th, The tone of coverage shifted toward the consequences for Sanchez, yet even here, elements of sympathetic framing persisted alongside the hard facts. Once Indianapolis authorities announced a serious felony battery charge against Sanchez for inflicting a severe facial wound on the other man, Perry told, news outlets reported it prominently. There was no sugarcoating that Sanchez now faced up to 6 years in prison if convicted. But interestingly, media pieces continued to remind readers that Sanchez himself was badly injured and recovering. And I've seen that a lot, including having the family write something on Sanchez's behalf. So that's why it was very smart for TMZ to print what Perry Toll's family and friends had said. ABC News and others included statements from Sanchez's family and employers expressing concern for his health and gratitude to medical staff. I still think here the most obvious shift that I saw here, which to me was disgusting, was when they put that article out that stated that Perry Toll was in violation of having a knife. It was a company violation, a violation of strict policy, company policy, irrelevant. Even the company was saying, we're more concerned about his safety. But they made it like it was equivalent to the law, like he violated something. That to me was disgusting. On a similar scale, blaming Celeste Rivas for causing what happened to her, blaming her family, equally disgusting. So this creates a psychologically complex narrative where readers are asked to hold two seemingly contradictory truths. Sanchez is charged with a serious violent crime. Sanchez is also a victim who was hospitalized. So can someone be both perpetrator and victim? Legally, the answer depends on who initiated force and whether the response was proportional. But emotionally, how does your brain handle this contradiction? Does Sanchez's injury make his crime seem less serious? Does it create sympathy that overrides judgment? He provoked it. So he's 100% accountable. And in TMZ's ongoing coverage after detailing the charges, they added that Sanchez has yet to share his side of things as he doesn't remember much from that night. Of course, he's waiting for a lawyer to tell him what to say. That single line slightly humanizes Sanchez, implying he was so deeply impaired or traumatized that he blacked out the incident. It neither excuses nor condemns him, but it certainly invites the audience to see him as fallible human who made a possibly drunken mistake rather than a villain with malicious intent. So I want to see, this is where you can start seeing the seeds for legal defense. That's why when I cover my stuff, I try to bring it all the way to the distance. I try to bring it as far as I can so we're prepared for the BS that may come our way when it comes to victim blaming. This doesn't remember detail, does several kinds of things. So it plants seeds for potential legal defense. How can we convict someone who has no memory of events? Suggests extreme impairment, reinforces the chaos confusion narrative, which he chose, by the way, he drank. Generates sympathy. Imagine the horror of not knowing what you did, and preempts victim account. If Sanchez can't remember, perhaps Toll's version is one-sided or exaggerated. Now, if you attack someone while so drunk you blacked out, does that memory loss reduce your culpability or actually increase it? That's the question. And I think, to be honest with you, if they want to play that route, that would only help Perry Toll if this goes the distance. Should voluntary intoxication that leads to violence be a mitigating factor or an aggravating one? I think it could be an aggravating one. And should lack of memory function as a defense or as an evidence of reckless impairment? Guys, Russ pushed aggravating factor in yesterday's show. So again, now we go to the victim who isn't quite a victim. Even the victim, who by all accounts was an older gentleman just doing his job, was described in some reports in a way that kept focus on the unusualness of the event rather than on Sanchez's culpability. For example, instead of calling the 69-year-old simply the victim, TMZ often referred to him as the alleged victim. Since in the legal sense, Sanchez became the defendant and the truck driver the victim of battery. It's a small legalistic qualifier, but alleged victim can sound less sympathetic than just victim. It's alleged victim. He alleges he's a victim. Meanwhile, Mark was still often just Mark Sanchez or the NFL event. We didn't hear alleged defendant in these narratives, a familiar name that readers might instinctively side with. And we talked about that too in last show. What works for Sanchez is his notoriety. So celebrities kind of do get a little bit of a break because people think what you see on camera, that's who they really are when it's really just probably mostly performative. So people have an idea that they connect to the individual. That's why when he did this, they're all shocked. No way it could be him, but it was. And how well do you really know him? What do you mean, no way it could be him? You hang out with him, you know him? You know him that well that you could be totally shocked? That's why it would be pretty interesting, because he's suing Fox. And I think that's a very smart move, because if there's anything out there that Fox has about his behavior, they're going to have to show it. Maybe letters to HR. You never know what comes out of the woodwork. Okay, so the alleged victim, a truck driver, was pulled from his vehicle by Mark Sanchez. So I want to ask you a question, just again, like we did with the Celeste Rivas Hernandez. What do you think works here? The alleged victim, a truck driver, was pulled from his vehicle by Mark Sanchez, or Perry Toll, a 69-year-old grandfather working his delivery route, was attacked by the former quarterback. Same facts, wildly different emotional resonance. Which version appeared in most coverage and why? So again, the alleged victim, a truck driver, was pulled from his vehicle by Mark Sanchez. Look at that. The alleged victim, a truck driver, or Perry Toll, a 69-year-old grandfather working his delivery route, was attacked by a former quarterback. You didn't see the latter. Furthermore, details about Toll's injuries, while mentioned, rarely received the same descriptive treatment as Sanchez's hospitalization. We heard extensively about Sanchez being rushed to surgery, being in critical condition, his long recovery. Toll's permanent facial disfigurement, a gash penetrating completely through the cheek, affecting his jaw, tongue, and mouth, making speech difficult, destroying his appearance for his son's wedding, was noted but not dwelled upon with the same emotional weight. That's why we were all shocked when we saw this picture. We thought it wasn't that severe. But then the family or someone released that picture to the news and they said, whoa, don't downplay this. Look at what he did. And that was eye-opening. If that picture didn't come out, we'd be seeing things totally different. I want a comparative analysis here. Count the paragraph or sentences devoted to Sanchez's injuries versus Toll's in typical coverage. What does this distortion tell us? This distortion tell us about whose suffering matters more in media, in the media narrative, whose pain is newsworthy. So this reveals a troubling hierarchy in how we process violence. So celebrity pain equals sympathetic, worthy of detailed coverage, humanizing. Non-celebrity pain, unfortunate but abstract, collateral damage in a larger story. Toll will carry the scars of his attack for life. He may have missed his son's wedding, or will miss his son's wedding, because his face was too damaged to appear in photos. He may lose his job for having a weapon, even though it saved his life. Yet his suffering is footnoted while Sanchez is centered. So if positions were reversed, if an unknown 69-year-old delivery driver drunkenly attacked Mark Sanchez and was stabbed in self-defense, would we hear about the driver's permanent disfigurement? Would media emphasize the driver's hospitalization? Or would the story simply be celebrity defends self against violent attacker? I want to talk about the normative arc. So from a broader lens, the narrative arc. From a broader lens, the narrative arc engineered by the media is the Mark Sanchez case. And the Mark Sanchez case went like this. First, you got the shock. Sanchez stabbed in critical condition. That's the initial headline. Then you got the intrigue, bizarre footage of him stumbling. What was he doing? And these are mid-story details with the video. Clarification, he was involved in a parking dispute gone wrong. And that's after police statements. In the aftermath, both men hurt. Charges pending. Sanchez recovering. This arc shaped public perception in stages. Primacy bias meant that many fans first saw notification like Mark Sanchez stabbed in Indianapolis, leading them to a view Mark primarily as a victim of a violent crime. The later introduction of facts showing he started the fight may not have spread as widely or sunk in as deeply, especially if one only skimmed the initial news. Meanwhile, ambiguity in early reports, unclear what led to the incident, left room for speculation. Was it a mugging, a random attack? Only when the clear story, a drunken dispute over parking, was published did that ambiguity resolve, and by then the public's emotional response, sympathy, surprise, had already been established. So again, if you follow this story as it unfolded, did your opinion of Sanchez change with each new piece of information, or did your initial impression from the first headline remain dominant? And can you identify why? And I still see it. I still see people still see people defending Sanchez. Finally, media outlets employed a bit of damage control framing once the dust settled. There was an effort to underscore that this was an isolated freak occurrence, not something that defined Sanchez's character long term. So this is the minimization part. Notably, law enforcement spokespeople were quoted with broad statements. "I don't care who you are. If you commit violence, we'll hold you accountable," said the Indianapolis police chief. This quote, carried by multiple outlets, served to reassure the public that despite Sanchez's fame, he wasn't above the law, implicitly suggesting that some had feared he might get off easy. It's part of the narrative shaping, too. Acknowledging public sentiment, so celebrity justice concerns, and addressing it. Additionally, it was reported that no charges were filed against the truck driver, as his actions were apparently in self-defense, a fact that positions the event as something that happened to Sanchez because of his own behavior, granted, rather than a mutual brawl. And other than the initial frenzy, stories about Sanchez included his family statement asking for privacy and focusing on his healing, gently nudging the public to remember that behind the sensational headlines is a human being recovering from trauma. Notice how isolated incident and asking for privacy function together. Isolated incident, asking for privacy. They suggest this isn't who Sanchez really is, just one bad night, and we should give him space to heal rather than judge. Is this appropriate framing for someone charged with felony battery? Would a non-celebrity receive the same consideration? So here's the conclusion. Common threads that you can see across both cases. Examining the Celeste Rivas and Mark Sanchez stories side by side, we see a common thread in how tabloid and popular media steer public perception. It's all about what information hits first, what context comes later, and how each is framed. Look at that order. What information hits first, what context comes later, and how each is framed. In both cases, TMZ and similar outlets use the inverted pyramid approach masterfully, leading with startling facts, a dead teen in a star car, an NFL star stabbed on a city street to grab attention. These leads, amplified by headlines and push alerts, played on the primacy effect, ensuring the public's first impression was dramatic and memorable. Then, as more details emerged, the narrative pivoted. The outlets did not contradict their initial reports, but rather added layers that changed the emphasis. So looking at both cases together, can you identify a formula or pattern for how celebrity-involved crime stories are told? What are the stages? What techniques appear in both? And as I mentioned, in this case here, it's going to be all the way down to minimization, especially when it gets to the point where there's got to be accountability. It's going to be wanting to figure out what's happening, then question the evidence. And when the evidence speaks too loud, question the credibility, question due process, question law enforcement, question everything to destroy credibility of the people that are in the authority to collect the information needed to hold accountability. And when that doesn't work, let's minimize. Let's create unfalsifiable third-party conspiracies. I want you to recognize some of these patterns, though. So the shock drop. So you got lead with the most sensational fact. This is what the news does. Center the celebrity's name. Create immediate emotional response. Leave key context ambiguous. So again, leave key context ambiguous. Then you got the amplification. So first you have the shock drop, then you have the amplification. Release surveillance footage or images, quote sources close to the investigator, and tangential scandalous details, or add tangential scandalous details, build speculation and debate. Then you get the pivot. Introduce complicating information, reframe the victim if applicable, emphasize chaos, confusion, complexity, and use attribution to deliver damning facts without outlet responsibility. And the softening. Humanize the celebrity, emphasize their suffering or confusion, quote family members asking for privacy, and frame as isolated incident or tragic mistake. For Celeste Rivas, the story moved from suspicion of David to compassion for a troubled girl. For Celeste Rivas, the story moved from suspicion of David to compassion for a troubled girl, and by extension, possibly exoneration of David, since the more one heard of Celeste's secret life, the less focus stayed on the singer's potential guilt. For Mark Sanchez, coverage transitioned from shock at his victimhood to acknowledgement of his role in the fracas, yet still couching it in a narrative of a wild, chaotic night rather than a cold-blooded assault. Throughout media language and sourcing played pivotal roles. Phrases like friends say, law enforcement sources tell us, and authorities confirm lent credence to certain angles, whether it was Celeste's fake ID or the claim that Sanchez smelled of alcohol and slurred his speech. and mentions of no charges filed or no suspect name, yet reminded audience that these stories were evolving, tempering immediate judgment and keeping readers hooked for updates. So in both cases, the phrases "no charges filed" appeared repeatedly in early coverage. How does this phrase function? Does it suggest innocence, caution, ongoing investigation? How might the average reader interpret it? And how does that interpretation benefit the celebrity involved? And I want to talk about one last thing, the psychology of bias. These techniques tap into psychological biases with surgical precision. This is important, guys, because this is the things that we may not know are affecting us. So ambiguity bias had people speculating when facts were scant. Was David a killer or just unlucky? Was Sanchez attacked or the attacker? And in both cases, the media dangled enough tidbits to fuel water cooler debate until official answers filled in. Then you got the victim reframing was evident as well. Celeste, the actual victim, was subtly reframed in some coverage as a runaway who lied about her age, which can shift public sympathy or at least complicate the victim's narrative. Conversely, Mark Sanchez, who actually faced criminal charges and in some ways benefited from a form of victim reframing too, portrayed as a man who fell victim to his own bad night and got badly hurt in the process rather than a one-dimensional perpetrator. You got the inverted pyramid structure. It ensured that if one only read the first paragraph of each saga, one might come away with a very skewed and sensational understanding, that by design to hook readers. That's what it's meant to do. The full nuance only emerges for those who read on or follow up on later reports. So the question here is, think about news stories you've only half followed, headlines you've seen, but articles you haven't fully read. How much of your understanding of those events come from incomplete information? How confident are you in opinions formed from headlines alone? And then when it comes to creating the narrative, this is all part of the psychological game. Ultimately, what do these two cases demonstrate is that outlets like TMZ are not just reporting news, they are actively crafting a narrative timeline. They start the fire, they fan it, then sometimes help put it out or redirect it. Now, this is not accidental. It's a refined playbook. So you have the initial expose, maximum shock value, maximum clicks, follow-up exclusives, keeps the story alive, sustained traffic. That's what we're seeing here, these little tidbits that people run with just to keep it alive, but are really irrelevant. But it gets picked up by everyone. Again, interviewing that kid or the one recently for Celeste Rivas with the what was the one that was just real? The police coming 11 times to the house. Well, obvious. She ran away multiple times. Why wouldn't they come to the house? And then being very vague as to the reasons why, but definitely putting at the top troubled home with no context. And that's what started for me with all this concern with how they're trying to shift blame and create their own narrative. And then the perspective shifts. So you got the initial expose, the follow-up exclusives, the perspective shift. So you got a new angle equals reason to re-engage readers who thought the story was over. And that's important. If it's getting traction, let's create a little twist and then re-engage and get people in. That's where, these unknown sources come in, all this other stuff. All aimed at sustaining public interest while also managing the story's tone. For the critical consumer of news, it's a reminder to consider what we're told first versus what we learn later. The truth may not change, but how it's told certainly does. So how many times did you click on articles about either of these cases? How many ads did you see? How much revenue do you think outlets generated from your engagement? Does understanding the profit motive change how you evaluate the coverage? And then you have the access economy. As these stories unfolded, TMZ and company managed to both sensationalize and contextualize, to pivot from implication to explanation. In doing so, they showed the power of media framing, where the suspect can become a side note and the victim can have their motives questioned, all depending on how the story is told. But this power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's sustained by relationships. Publicists and lawyers know that TMZ will publish what they're given if it's newsworthy and legally defensible. This creates a marketplace where legal teams provide context that serves their clients. Publicists trade exclusive information for favorable framing. Law enforcement sources selectively leak details that shape narratives, and TMZ maintains relationships by being useful to all parties. So here's another question. In the David case, who do you think benefited from the troubled home and fake ID details becoming prominent? Who had access to that information and motivation to share it? In the Sanchez case, who benefited from the doesn't remember the night detail? Can you trace the likely source of each piece of information? And here's a crucial insight. There's no such thing as purely objective crime reporting in celebrity cases. Every editorial choice is a framing choice. Which details lead the story? Which are buried mid-article? Whose suffering gets detailed description? Whose actions get sympathetic language? Which sources are quoted? What context is provided or omitted? None of these decisions are neutral. They're all shaped possessions. I mean, can you think of a way to report either of these stories that would be truly neutral? And what would that even look like? Is neutrality possible, or is every act of journalism necessarily an act of framing? And here's the deeper analysis, the asymmetry of narrative power. What's particularly striking in both cases is the massive imbalance in narrative shaping resources between parties. In David's case, David arrives with existing fame, fan base, and likely sophisticated legal counsel. Celeste Rivas is dead and cannot speak for herself. Her family has no PR apparatus to counter narratives, and law enforcement sources become the primary voice shaping her story. Law enforcement sources. In the Sanchez case, Mark Sanchez has name recognition, professional connection, and resources for top-tier legal representation. Perry Toll is a 69-year-old delivery driver, the epitome of invisibility in American society. Toll's injuries are so severe, he can barely speak. He's dependent on his attorneys to communicate for him, and he faces potential job consequences for having a weapon, even though it saved his life. Last question. In both cases, one party had far more power to shape the narrative than the other. How does this imbalance affect our understanding of the truth? And if you were Perry Toll or Celeste Rivas, God rest her soul, how would you feel? Again, guys, a lot of food for thought here. I just want to continue this. I think we hit our point here. I think when you're trying to be a voice for a victim, trying to create some level of impact, you can't allow for the story to be reshaped in a way that discredits the victim. Because in the end, they're not here to speak for themselves. And that's kind of the role we take when doing this. I would like to think that's the role we're taking. I think the bigger meaning here is the impact we can have by being that voice for the voiceless. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. Stay safe.